The Cannon-class destroyer escort, the USS Eldridge, was commissioned by the Navy on August 27, 1943. She spent her first few weeks afterward in Long Island Sound before traveling to Bermuda for a shakedown cruise in late September. On October the 18th, the Eldridge returned to New York Harbor where it remained until early November, when it was finally drafted into service in World War II. It served with distinction, supporting Allied efforts in the Mediterranean and the Pacific until it was decommissioned in 1946. It was sold to Greece a few years later and was eventually scrapped in 1999. It was definitely not in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in late October of 1943, and its record, while sterling, is relatively uneventful. At least, that's the official story. Rumor has it something happened to the USS Eldridge in Philadelphia that month, something too strange to believe.
All you'll ever be.
Navy seamen David Herdig and Jim Parker do not belong. They emerge from the desert in 1984, confused and battered from the military experiment they just escaped in 1943. It was then, at the height of World War II, that military scientists attempted to cloak the USS Eldridge from enemy radar, only for the test to go horribly awry, sending David and Jim over 40 years forward in time. Suffering from lingering electromagnetic side effects and running from the military with the aid of a woman named Allison, can Jim and David find a way back, or will the future be the end of their story?
In 1979, the linguist and paranormal author Charles Berlitz, alongside ufologist Bill Moore, published The Philadelphia Experiment Project Invisibility, a book about the popular urban legend in which the USS Eldridge was allegedly used to test invisibility. I'll talk about the actual legend later, but for now, just know that Berlitz and Moore's book was dismissed by critics and even other conspiracy theory junkies. However, the book was popular enough to get the attention of the independent Avco Embassy Pictures, which purchased the movie rights. It was then given to writer-director John Carpenter, who was still riding high off the success of Halloween and The Fog. Carpenter worked on a screenplay, which he called a, quote, great shaggy dog story, unquote, and as such, he didn't know how to end it. Creatively drained, he abandoned the unfinished script and pleaded with Avco to let him make his long-gestating Escape from New York instead. The Philadelphia experiment floated around a bit after that, with Roger Corman's New World Pictures buying it from Avco. Other directors like Joe Dante and Jonathan Demme were briefly attached before, in 1983, Stuart Raffle, who had just finished The Ice Pirates, was pegged to direct from a script that had been heavily rewritten by Michael Janover, William Gray, Don Jacoby, and Wallace Bennett. After Raffle himself worked on yet another draft of the screenplay without credit, the Philadelphia Experiment finally went into production on a budget of around $9 million. This episode is made possible in part by the contributions of viewers like you. If you'd like to support what I do with more than just a like or subscribe, you can check out my Patreon to get early access to videos, vote on future topics like this one, and more. I'd like to offer a special thanks to my $8 patrons: Batty Bat Firebrand, Chuck Poor, Diane McGill Davis, Giffen Chumley, John Burrell, Mike O'Connor, Numinous 2019, Robert McGill, Scott Johnner, Sean Vale, Spoats, TB Schromick, and Warren Davis, and shout out my other patrons and channel members as well. I sincerely couldn't do this without you. Now then, let's get back to the subject at hand. The primary lead, David, is played by Michael Paré, who had just made a name for himself as the titular Eddie in Eddie and the Cruisers, while David's best friend and fellow time traveler Jim is played by Bobby DeCicco, who had previously appeared in Steven Spielberg's 1941 and Ron Howard's Splash. The female lead, Allison, meanwhile, is played by Nancy Allen, who had also appeared in 1941, as well as Carrie, Dressed to Kill, and Strange Invaders, and who would later star in the previously covered sci-fi classic, RoboCop.
Freeze!
Other actors worth noting are the great Eric Christopher as the older Dr. Longstreet, Stephen Tobolowsky as his assistant Barney, Marnie's Louise Latham as the older Pamela, and a young Glenn Morshower as this confused mechanic. Filming began in late November of 1983, with location shooting done in Charleston, South Carolina, where the USS Laffey stood in for the Eldridge, in the Bonneville Salt Flats, the defunct Wendover Air Force Base, and Salt Lake City in Utah, and in Los Angeles. Despite being more than willing to participate in several movie productions throughout the 70s and 80s, the US Navy, perhaps trying to distance itself from the popular legend of the Philadelphia experiment, did not help in any way. The effects were done by Max W. Anderson, who had previously worked with director Stuart Raffle on The Ice Pirates, while the music was done by frequent John Williams collaborator Kenneth Wanberg. I try to stay positive on this channel, so I'm not going to talk more about either of their contributions to the film. The Philadelphia Experiment released on August 3, 1984 to mixed reviews, and it flopped at the box office, only making a little over $8 million domestically. It released on home video a record-breaking 10 weeks after its theatrical debut, where it did a little better and earned itself a cult following that was strong enough to inspire a sequel in 1993 and a Sci-Fi Channel remake in 2012, neither of which I've actually seen yet. As for me, I feel like I need to say at the start that I do like the Philadelphia Experiment, because I have a lot of nitpicks, and I'm not just talking about this stunt car's visible pneumatics. No, my nitpicks are more about the story, and please remember, I nitpick out of love. So let's get into it. While it makes perfect sense for somebody like E.T. to run from the military, it's beyond weird to me that our hero in this film, David, a World War II-era seaman, would instinctively run at the first sight of a fellow soldier, especially when he eventually concludes that the people he needs to trust are, well, soldiers. He even casually assaults and even kills a few of his fellow military men during the course of the story, and he seems to have no remorse or regret about it. Other than it being a common 80s movie trope, why exactly are the military the bad guys through most of this movie? It makes no sense. Skeptical attitudes towards the US military are largely a post-World War II phenomenon, which is why there's a disconnect between where the story wants to go and where the character of David would logically take it. And that skepticism is reflected not only in the movie version of the Philadelphia Experiment, but also in the very existence of the legend itself. By the 1980s, American culture was more than justified in having more cynical and questionable attitudes about the things its military gets up to or the things it tries to sweep under the rug. And if the movie is about anything more than just being a fun little time travel yarn, then that would have to be it. Of course, that hardly makes the film stand out. And while regular viewers of this channel surely expect me to applaud the consistent time travel rules, which I absolutely do, I question why nobody seems to consider the possibility that David can just come back to the future in the end, especially when he tells his friend Jim in the past that that's exactly what he plans to do. I also can't overlook the whole Chekhov's pregnancy that never pays off. If there's a significant pregnant character in the past in a time travel story, surely the in utero child would be important, or at the very least mentioned, in the future. Still, like I said, I do like this movie and think it deserves its cult status. At the end of the day, it's a road movie that works in large part because of the performances of its leads, especially Nancy Allen. I don't know if it's the lingering fingerprints of John Carpenter, But the story reminds me of Starman, in that it features a guy out of his element on the road running from the military with a half-willing female hostage. It has its flaws, to be sure, but its heart is in the right place, and the story doesn't waste too much time trying to explain everything. Raffel clearly understands that this movie is less about the science fiction than it is about the characters, and as a fish-out-of-water romance, it works pretty well. The scene where David visits the elderly Jim and Pamela hits some especially poignant emotional beats. I also appreciate how it uses the legend of the real-life Philadelphia experiment. I'm not here to tell you whether or not the Philadelphia experiment actually happened. I have my own opinion on the matter, but we don't need to get into it, because this channel isn't the Y-Files, which has a great episode on the matter that breaks it down better than I ever could. Much love to Hecklefish. What I do like about the movie, though, is that it uses a lot of critical elements of the tale, like the particularly gnarly detail of people being fused with the hull of the Eldridge, and adds its own unique spin on it, namely time travel, which isn't actually a feature of the legend. Real rumors aside, fans of 80s sci-fi should absolutely check out the movie, and keep the popcorn ready, because the Philadelphia experiment is a sci-fi classic. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. Do you think the Philadelphia experiment actually happened? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, make sure you've hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when we'll genuflect to an alien war criminal, this is the Unapologetic Geek telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.